Wow, what a year 2025 has been. It really feels like a year defined by fractures. Whether you're looking at global security or our own economies, it just feels like the ground is shifting under our feet. So in this special year-end explainer, we're going to connect the dots between some of these major shifts and take a look at what might be coming next. All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with the global tensions that have pretty much everyone on edge. Then we'll zoom in on the economic anxiety and the incredible ambition in AI that's changing, well, everything. We'll see how that plays out in a massive new American law, then take a look at a planet that's clearly under pressure. And finally, we'll look ahead to the really crucial tests waiting for us in 2026. Okay, let's dive right into our first stop, the big picture of global security. If there's one feeling that really defined 2025, it's the sense that the systems we all thought were keeping the world stable, well, they're kind of fraying at the seams. And look, that's not just a vibe, right? It's a pretty stark assessment from the analysts over at Chatham House. I mean, this quote, "Not a banner year for the international security order," that just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the widespread deterioration we've seen all over the globe this year. And when we talk about these trends, they're not just abstract ideas for university paper. Hybrid warfare, that's real-world stuff like drone disruptions and physical sabotage that really blur the line between war and peace. And weaponized interdependence, that's basically using things like trade and economic connections as a weapon. As we're about to see, these ideas weren't just theories in 2025. They became reality in hotspots all across the planet. And just look at the sheer scope of this instability. I mean, it's everywhere. You had violent civil unrest exploding in Bangladesh after a student leader was killed. Over in Ukraine, they're proposing a new peace framework even as the conflict itself is still very much raging. Then, tensions in the Americas just went through the roof when the U.S. started seizing Venezuelan oil tankers. That's a huge policy shift. And all of this is happening while conflicts in the Middle East just keep on going. It really is a global thing. But, in the middle of all this chaos, we also heard these really powerful calls for peace. Pope Leo XIV, in his very first Christmas address, made a point to specifically name places like Gaza, Yemen, and Syria. He was talking directly to the people living in what he called fragility. And what was so powerful was this line he used from an Israeli poet. It's just so evocative. He said that the peace of a ceasefire is not real peace, but a peace that comes from the inside, like wildflowers. So he wasn't just asking for a temporary truce, right? He was talking about something much, much deeper, a genuine peace that has to grow from the inside out. All right, so let's shift gears now. Let's see how these geopolitical pressures are colliding with two other massive forces. This deep-seated economic anxiety we're all feeling, and this explosive ambition in artificial intelligence. This right here, this is the fundamental question. Experts at the Brookings Institution say this is what's driving so much of the economic unease. It's a fear that's been simmering for years, but it's really been brought to a boil by all this new technology and global instability. And what Brookings points out is this huge disconnect. The political story you often hear focuses on external factors, but the economic reality is that the American workforce has been hollowed out for decades, with middle-skill jobs disappearing. This creates a kind of anxiety vacuum. And new technologies like AI are just rushing to fill it, making that big question about the future of work feel more urgent than ever. And right in the middle of all this anxiety, you've got this just staggering level of investment. The big tech companies have poured hundreds of billions of dollars into AI infrastructure just this year, and they're planning to spend even more in 2026. This money fueled an absolute frenzy to close out the year. We saw Google drop Gemini 3, OpenAI launch GPT 5.2, and Anthropic introduce Claude 4.5. Now, the key here isn't just that they're smarter. They introduced something called adaptive reasoning, which is basically the ability to tackle complex, multi-step problems all on their own. That changes the very nature of what AI can do. So how does all this political and economic pressure actually turn into policy? Well, a perfect example from this year is the monumental One Big Beautiful Bill in the United States. Okay, so what is this thing? The One Big Beautiful Bill is a massive piece of legislation. It's a direct response to those economic anxieties we were just talking about. The whole idea is to put more money in people's pockets by locking in trillions of dollars in tax cuts and adding some new ones, while also changing major federal spending programs. And the scale of this is just immense. The law is projected to reduce federal revenues by an estimated $4.5 trillion over the next 10 years. To put that into perspective, that makes it the single most expensive law passed since 2012. And this chart really shows you where all that cost is coming from. A massive 82% of the total tax reduction comes from simply making the 2017 tax policies permanent. The other 18% comes from a bunch of brand new tax cuts introduced in this bill. Now, the bill's impact isn't happening all at once. It's more of a slow rollout. Some parts, like tax exemptions on tips, started right away in 2025. Others, like major changes to student loans, are coming in 2026. And it's interesting, some of the new tax cuts are actually temporary. They're scheduled to expire in 2028, unless someone takes action in the future. Okay, so from the very calculated world of fiscal policy, where trillions are moved around with the stroke of a pen, we're now going to turn to a force that operates on a completely different scale, one that no policy can really control, and which gave us a very real, very disruptive reminder over the holidays. So, over the Christmas holiday, this massive storm system, what's known as a Pineapple Express, just slammed into Southern California. Meteorologists were describing it as a once-in-a-decade event, and it dumped record-breaking amounts of rain all over the region.
The consequences were severe and immediate. A state of emergency was declared as saturated ground, especially near recent wildfire burn scars, gave way to dangerous mudslides. Over 120,000 people lost power during the holiday. Some communities got buried under a foot of rain, a really stark illustration of our growing vulnerability to this kind of extreme weather.
So that brings us to our final section. After a year that was defined by unraveling security, big economic transformations, and these climate shocks, what does it all mean for 2026? What are the key moments, the inflection points we really need to be watching? Well, according to that analysis from Chatham House, the year is going to start with two really critical tests for global stability. In February, the very last nuclear arms treaty between the US and Russia is set to expire. Then in April, the world will get together to review the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The outcomes of these two events are going to tell us a whole lot about whether cooperation is even still possible. Which really leaves us with this final central question. With so many of the old rules and systems under so much pressure, the big challenge for 2026 and beyond is, can the international community build new safeguards before things unravel even further? I'll leave you with that to think about. Thanks so much for joining this Explainer.